Hello, everyone. On behalf of DIGRA India, I welcome you all to our talk series. Today we have Dr. Souvik Mukherjee presenting on Indian board games. His talk is titled Indian Board Games, Colonial Avatars, Transculturation, Colonialism, and Board Games. Although Dr. Mukherjee doesn't really need an introduction, but I think it is my responsibility to introduce him. And Dr. Souvik Mukherjee's research looks at the narrative and the literary through the emerging discourse of video games as a storytelling media, and at how these games inform and challenge our conceptions of narratives, identity, and culture. Related interests and expertise include a broad spectrum of topic in game studies, ranging from identity and temporality in video games to the video game industry in Southeast Asia. Currently, he's researching how video games relate to post-colonial studies, and separately, also how certain ancient Indian board games contribute to the understanding of gameplay. Dr. Souvik Mukherjee was also a founding member of DIGRA India, and has mentored us as we go ahead in this journey. We're very grateful, Dr. Mukherjee, that you're repeating this talk for us. And yes, looking forward to it. Just a few housekeeping rules. Please use the chat box to direct your questions, comments. We will be having a Q&A session at the end of this talk. And please keep yourselves on mute. Maybe in the question answer session, we can have a more direct conversation. Thank you, and over to you, Dr. Mukherjee.
So thank you so much, Isha, for this generous introduction. And I mean, you have mentored me as much as I've mentored you. Really, it has been a nice journey so far. Let us see how long we can keep DIGRA India alive and ticking. So more power to us. But let me also say that I have already given this talk at the Center for Studies and Social Sciences for Calcutta, actually not very long ago. But I just thought I would give this talk again, as there were some people in DIGRA India who wanted to have an online talk, and there was no option at the CSSS at that point. There will be now. But also, the reason why I'm giving this talk is because the scheduled speaker, Usfa Freeman from Tampere University, was unable to give this talk. So she just announced at very short notice because she was very ill, and we'll have to postpone her talk. Looking forward to that one. So this is like kind of a filler, but also again, kind of this is, how do I say it? It's kind of a draft work of that I'm doing right now. I'm writing a book which is titled exactly the same as this. So it's kind of like a book talk. So, well, here goes. Let's see what you think. So I'm going to start. Let me see if the audio is working. I don't know if the audio is working in the share. Is it working, Nisha?
No, sir. Oh, maybe I'm having some. Oh,
No.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's working now.
I'll just kind of go back to it.
I think it's working now.
If you're playing something, we can't hear, but we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, I am playing. This is actually a scene from Shatranj Ki Khilari, but yeah, bear with me a second.
I think the audio is not coming through.
Now? Now?
Yes. Now it's coming through, yes.
अब ये शतरंज भी कंपनी की अमलदारी में आ गई क्या? खूब। वैसे मैंने ला मार्टिने के कॉलिन साहब से सीखी। मैं उन्हें उर्दू फारसी पढ़ाने जाता हूँ ना। अच्छा मुंशी साहब, ये दोनों वजों में फर्क क्या है? नवाब साहब को ज्यादा फर्क नहीं। क्या आपका वजीर जो है, वो अंग्रेजी खेल में क्वीन यानी मलिका कहलाता है, और दोनों आमने सामने रहती हैं। और प्यादा पहली चाल में 2 घर चल सकता है। 2 घर? जी हाँ, 2 घर। और मुखालिफ सिरे पर पहुंच जाए तो मलिका बन जाता है। आप कमाल करते हैं अंग्रेज। मगर इन तब्दीलियों से फायदा? बाजी झटपट खत्म हो जाती है। क्यों? उन्हें हमारा खेल सुस्त लगता है। जी हाँ, उन्हें हमारी सवारियां भी सुस्त लगती हैं। इसीलिए तो रेलगाड़ियां आने वाली है। और तार? जी हाँ, तार घर तो कब के आ गए, लेकिन मुझे एक आंख पे नहीं भाती। क्यों? बुरी खबरें जो फौरन पहुंच जाती हैं। आपने कुछ सुना नहीं? हम सुनते कुछ नहीं मुंशी साहब, खेलते हैं। मीर साहब, हंसने से बला नहीं टलेगी। सुना है कंपनी बहादुर अवध पे कब्जा करने वाली है।
So I don't know how much of the dialogue you got, but again, maybe the subtitles will have kind of been of some help. But this is a scene from Shatranj Ki Khilari, which is a film by Satyajit Ray, which was based on Munshi Premchand's story Shatranj Ki Khilari, written both in Hindi and Urdu. And it's a fantastic story, fantastic movie too. I won't go into the praises of both or why I like them so much. But what I wanted to do with this little clip is to talk about how the game of chess changes and how these changes are being connected to colonialism. For example, kind of, well, if you've grown up the same time as I have, you would have come across 2 types of chess in India. I used to play chess in my para, and we used to have competitions, bazi, like this person's here. And we would be always be asking national na international, national or international. And these the rules of these 2 types of chess play were very different, not very different, but were different. And you can see that, okay, one of the rules was that in international chess is that you can start your game by moving the pawns 2 squares. Any pawn can move 2 squares. And the other one that he mentioned is that of promotion. So the pawn gets promoted to become a queen. Exactly what happens in Alice in Wonderland, sorry, Through the Looking Glass rather, where Alice moves all the way across the board and becomes a queen, and then she can go back wherever she wants. But these 2 things are, and there are many others as well. There are many others, many other differences, and they're not kind of so they're not the same in the Indian way of playing chess. And here, Munshi Saab and Mir Saab and Mirza Saab, they're kind of comparing this to how Tar and Railgadi, as in telegraph and the railways, have come into Indian lives, being brought in by the colonial power, and how they're speeding up life, how they're changing the tempo of life, and they're seeing that as ominous. And with the coming of Tar also comes the news that Awadh, the kingdom of Awadh, Lucknow, is going to be taken over by Lord Dalhousie's forces. So with that kind of shift of the game's rules, the kind of moving from one culture to another of games, I want to start this talk. I'm also grateful to John Cramiller, who has who's allowed me to use these pictures, really, these photos. These are from his private collection. This is a game, a chess game, a chess set that has been presented, to Colonel Todd. Colonel Todd is the person who wrote the Annals of Rajasthan, and he was very influential in shaping British policy for northern India, especially Rajasthan. And Todd fell out with Ochterlony and then kind of lost some of his popularity, but he was a very, very influential figure at this time. But it's interesting because if you can read the text here, it says, Thakur Sahib Somnath Singh Ji, Chandawat, Captain Todd Sahib, Shatranj Baji, Tikana Amet. So Thakur Somnath Singh Ji, the Rawat of Amet, is playing chess with Captain Todd Sahib. And this chess match is almost like a political chess match, because it's probably kind of presented. This is actually where you can see the you can see the image that I showed you just now, which is like the top of the chessboard. It's also interesting, of course, to see the chess pieces themselves, because we are all used to see the king, queen, bishop, knight, and rook. But here you see the queen, king, the camel, the horse, and the elephant. So quite different pieces. And of course, the Thakur Sahib has written his name there on the piece where he's the king. He wants to. It's a clear indicator that he wants to show that the chess game is part of the game of diplomacy, and the part of the game that he's playing with the colonial powers. So it's kind of literally kind of colonialism and the response to colonialism played on the chessboard. So kind of like what Mir and Mirza are talking about, which he's playing the colonial powers and on the chessboard itself. So the board itself becomes the zone where the colonized and the colonizer meet and negotiate. So, of course, I mean, there are lots of these chess sets which also reflect the colonial power of kind of the East India Company in India, and you see some of these company chess sets. You can see the company lancer and the Indian soldier and the British king, so on and so forth. So, and this is actually made probably in Murshidabad, Jiaganj, very near where one of our Digra India members, Poonam Chaudhary, lives. But the history of chess and kind of colonialism goes back a long way, really, because even, I mean, the very early kind of East India Company officials were, well, often styled themselves Orientalists. Not maybe in the sense that Said uses the term, but then again, yeah. So kind of so there's William Jones, who even before he comes to India in 1763 writes about Kaisa, the game at chess. So Jones is already thinking about chess, but when he comes to India, he he finds out more about Indian modes of playing chess, and he immediately kind of concludes that chess must have originated in India, and he wrongly actually cites what he thinks is the Vishnu Puran, and through the help of of a Pandit who helps him, but he kind of details the rules for playing chess and the origins of chess and so on and so forth. But slightly later, you have another treatise written by a Captain Hiram Cox, after whom today the town of Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, modern day Bangladesh, is kind of named. And Cox was posted in Chittagong and in on the Arakat, modern day Myanmar. And he was a very successful diplomat, apparently. But he also finds out about the Burma game of chess, and then he kind of compares it with Indian, Chinese, and Persian games. And he also kind of comes up with what is called the Cox-Forbes theory of chess, the origin of chess, which was later disproved, because apparently he too was using incorrect sources. But this is the early interest in kind of chess games, and as you can see on the right, I've put a Chaturanga board just to show you what these people would have been looking at, really. Of course, the Burmese game of chess is slightly different, but let's not go into that later. And for example, the Chinese chess game, which actually has a river flowing in the middle of the board, not an actual river, obviously, but something that is supposed to represent a river. But anyway, all of these kind of versions, and there is so much interest at this time as to how the game of chess is changing and how it is important and so on. So here we have, I'm just going to show like an image that I got from the British Library, where an Indian and European are playing chess, and you can see the company ships in the background. But I wanted to bring up here the story, a really interesting story, interesting to me, of somebody called Mohishundar Banerjee, or actually Mahesh Chandra Banerjee, who was a Bengali Pandit, who lived around 1850, and he was regularly playing chess with somebody called John Cochrane. Now, John Cochrane was, you could say, there were no world champions around that time, but if there was anything like a world champion, then John Cochrane was the world champion of that time. He was later defeated by Staunton, Howard Staunton, after whom the current chess pieces are named, the Staunton chess pieces. But Cochrane, for whatever reason, was posted to India, and then as a lawyer, and he kind of he found out about Mahesh Chandra Banerjee, whom they all call Mohishundar Banerjee. So it's very difficult to find Mahesh Chandra under his real name, but basically, Mahesh Chandra was playing Cochrane regularly at that point, what was called the Calcutta Chess Club. And Mahesh Chandra had declared that he was unbeatable because he would often play chess blindfold. And there were also other people around that time who would play chess like that. But he played traditional Indian chess, which in Bengal at that time, the pawns did not have the option of moving 2 squares. And there was also there was no castling. And also a king could execute a knight's move once during a game. So like the knight moves like 2 squares and then 1 square to the right or left are Bangla jeta amra boli ek dui arai. So that's how the king could also move. So basically, Banerjee was kind of playing. Very often he had a deep kind of influence from the Indian game of chess, really, but he would very often defeat Cochrane. So he was quite unequal to Cochrane, really, and he is likely to have transitioned to Western rules after contact with Cochrane and other Europeans. But among his major contributions to mainstream chess, and this is what we don't usually know, is what is now called the King's Indian or the Queen's Indian. Many important chess players today use this, the King's Indian opening or the Queen's Indian opening. The King's Indian and the Queen's Indian are both contributions of Mahesh Chandra Banerjee, because he was actually playing the Indian way and he was adapting the Indian rules basically into the Western kind of game. So that's why the King's Indian and the Queen's Indian. And just like you've kind of watched the Queen's Gambit on Netflix, maybe we should have a King's Indian or a Queen's Indian program at some point. But of that later. So he also contributed what is called the Grunefeld defense, which was named after somebody called Grunfeld, but it was Banerjee who actually invented this defense 38 years before Grunfeld was born. So there we go. So that's one kind of, and then I wanted to talk about another Pandit who's kind of a real kind of genius chess player. He apparently never lost a game of chess except once to a woman, and that too he lost the game because he knew that losing the game he would gain a bullock cart from her. So, well, his name today is known as Trivangadacharya Shastri. I'm sure you probably have guessed his actual name is Thiruvenkatacharya Shastri. This is a European corruption. But Trivangadacharya Shastri wrote this book in the 1840s, all that early really, and he wrote this essays on chess adapted to the European mode of play. And here he describes how Indian chess rules are very different from European chess rules, right? So we have the Shastri, of course, kind of writing for his European masters and kind of being very, very generous to the collector of Bombay and so on, and other officials. But he's also making a point to explain how these games are so different, and so kind of it's so important to look at them from this other perspective, the other or othered perspective. But of course, there's a long line of people who are very influential. I just wanted to give you a name of the names of a few, and one is Lala Rajababu, who actually patents a chess recorder machine. I mean, this machine would record all the moves of the chess game. And you can see his name is L.R. Babu, chess recorder, and so on. And he also wrote a book called Muallam Shatranj, and so on. So there's quite a lot of work happening on chess around this time, and quite a lot of kind of many people, somebody like Tamannacharya Patsalkikar and others, they're trying to kind of write about how Indian and Western chess are relating, and so on. But it's not just about the rules of chess or how chess is played, but it's also about the players. Just like Maheshchandra Banerjee, there is one of the most famous chess players in colonial India is, and we don't remember him today at all. I mean, like I said in my talk in the center, that we had this massive chess Olympiad in, in Tamil Nadu very recently, but there was no mention of Mir Sultan Khan. Of course, now he can be claimed by Pakistan as well, but he was the champion of kind of undivided India, and Mir Sultan Khan actually defeated champions like Capablanca, but he was never recognized as a grandmaster by FIDE. And the interesting thing is that he actually went to England as a servant of Nawab Hayat Khan. And because Hayat Khan took him to England kind of to get some diplomatic brownie points just before kind of, partition and everything. But Sultan Khan was like this absolutely like unique player at this point. But we hardly know about him, sadly. Also, for example, we can also look at how, nevertheless, how Sultan Khan was being looked at is also quite curious. So you can see that in one of these kind of reports, somebody is saying that I allowed him to force a stalemate, etc., etc., which suggested that he only Hammond as a parson being superior to the Malayan influence. So just because Sultan Khan is winning against all of these kind of these established British or European players or American players, I mean, the kind of the explanation is that he is some kind of a devil and he can only be defeated by a parson, and he has this malign influence. So this Oriental other and kind of monstrosity and kind of the demonic influence, and all of this boxes are ticked here. Anyway, from Sultan Khan, I also wanted to very quickly, I know that, I mean, I'm doing a screen share here. I can't show you her photograph, but I will after this talk, really, just quickly. But Sultan Khan was actually also accompanied by someone called Miss Fatima. We don't know anything else about her, but she actually became the women's chess champion. And like I mentioned, Queen's Gambit, women playing chess and winning against men. But then Miss Fatima apparently defeated Winston Churchill, and she taught Queen Mary how to play. And she is again in a very Oriental fashion described as Fatima of the sparkling eyes, and straight out of the Song of Songs book in the Bible, and so on and so forth. Anyway, or straight out of the 1001 Nights and whatever. But she was also in the employ of Hayat Khan, and nobody remembers her, though she did give an interview in the 1990s, I think. So when I was kind of thinking about chess, what occurred to me was that kind of there is what one can call transculturation. This is kind of Fernando Ortiz, this kind of term, transculturation, and it is basically about kind of adding things, acquiring things from another culture, adding, then kind of losing things as well, losing cultural elements, and also creating consequent creation of new cultural phenomena. So neoculturation. So acculturation, deculturation, neoculturation, and together are described by Ortiz as transculturation. And this is fairly common in post-colonial theory. But I thought that it has not been, board games have not been looked at in these terms at all. And they really fit very well in these terms, like chess gaining new rules, new kind of play styles, then losing its original kind of some of its original play styles from India, for example. And then there are new forms of chess play, like the King's Indian defense, or a new form of chess player like Mir Sultan Khan kind of emerging. And like there was this story that kind of, I think, Orithro, you probably need to mute your mic. Yeah, thanks. So basically, kind of there's a story about Mir Sultan Khan apparently meeting other grandmasters, but they write that this was the first time that we were served we were waited on by another grandmaster. So because he was the servant of the Nawab and so on. So creates this complicated kind of structure in kind of playing games in board games. But the board game also itself becomes what I see as a contact zone, as what Mary Louise Pratt calls a contact zone, taking on from Ortiz's notion of transculturation. And basically the contact is about presence, co-presence, interaction, interlocking, understanding, and practices, but often with radical asymmetries. The contact zone is about kind of imperial encounters, which are easily ignored or suppressed by accounts of conquest and domination told from the invader's perspective. But the contact zone also is not just co-presence; it is also kind of often even violent co-presence. So that is what I'm kind of like looking at, the game board itself as a contact zone. So to take you to my next example, where I see this transculturation working very well, is kind of this game. All of you must be familiar with this, Snakes and Ladders, right? Played as children, and the objective is to reach 100 and you win. Played against many people. So the first Snakes and Ladders board is patented in 1892 by a British toy maker called Frederick Henry Ayres. Ayres also invented the rocking horse, for which is more famous. But the Snakes and Ladders game was probably played much before this, even probably in the 10th century AD, or Sometimes it has been attributed to the Saint Ganeshwar, who lived in the 13th century AD. So, in a Bhakti movement reformer. So, again, I mean, if you notice this board, then there's a difference here with the traditional snakes and ladders. First of all, you have words written in every square, and these words are about kind of different qualities, different characteristics, different kind of moral qualities, different karmic scenarios, really. But the game, again, isn't a 100-square game. It ends at square 72, where there's a snake, which will carry you straight down to square 51 to Earth, right? But the game is supposed to end on square 68. And this particular ending of the game is basically, it means that you can go round and round and round in this game in circles. So it can even be a never-ending game. Well, it's difficult to say, but you can just kind of keep going around and around in this game, and until you end up in square 68. And also, one has to remember that the game is not played with traditional dice. It is played with cowrie shells. Cowrie shells, like I show you in this image, one side is concave and the other side is convex. So if you have 7 cowrie shells, which would be usually used as dice, then it is also possible to throw a 7 as well as a 0, because it is possible to have all convex cowrie shells ending up in the convex side, really, so 0. And then you have to throw a certain number to be able to enter the game. And once you are in the game, you have to end up in square 72 to go back to Earth and then keep carrying on until you reach Nirvana or the plane of cosmic the plane of cosmic kind of consciousness and so on. In most games, it is called Vaikuntha or Vaikunt and so on. If these are kind of like Vaishnav games, there are also Shaiva games. There are Jain games. I'll show you some examples like the Jain games, and there are kind of Buddhist games. And the Buddhist games, of course, it's about kind of different ways of attaining karma. They're very hypertextual. I've written about it elsewhere. We're very happy to share if you want to look at it. Really, but so there are all these different multiple kinds of games, which are mainly, I mean, the first question is, are these even games? First of all, they're not meant to be played against people, particularly. They're not about not about a race like the stakes and ladders is, but they're more about kind of exploring a mental tradition. So more about pedagogy. Right. So, and they're all kind of connected very closely with the teachings of either the Bhakti movement or Jainism or so on and so forth, whatever philosophy or religious philosophical system that they're kind of engaging in. So they're probably philosophic boards. If they're board games, then they're philosophic board games, and it's much more complicated than what we have today. So, of course, the first board game that we can trace, the first physical example that we can trace is from the collection of someone called Richard Johnson, who was a deputy collector in Awadh, also a friend of William Jones. And as you can see, he was very popular in Awadh. He was given the title of Mumtaz ad-Dawla Mufakkar al-Mulk Richard Johnson Bahadur Husam Jang. So Richard Johnson, chosen of the dynasty, exalted of the kingdom, sharp blade in war, etc., by the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam. So Johnson was an eclectic collector and commissioned work by many Indian artists and scholars, of which 64 albums of paintings and an estimated 1,000 manuscripts in various different languages form the backbone of the East India Company Library, now the British Library. So this is Richard Johnson, painted in the company style. And Johnson after Johnson, of course, Johnson gets this painted and takes it back to back to England. After Johnson, we again come across another example. So this one is actually by a certain Captain Henry Dundas Robertson, about 100 years after Johnson, who gets a color drawing on the plan of the Shastri's game of heaven and hell. And the Shastri concerned here is, of course, our very own Devangadacharya Shastri, whom I have mentioned earlier. So Robertson, of course, is now giving it, and Pargeter, who describes it, and Robertson, they're calling it the game of heaven and hell. So once again, we're coming into an idea of heaven and hell, somewhat kind of a Christian idea of heaven and hell here, really, rather than what we would kind of experience in kind of Hindu or Jain paradigms or Buddhist paradigms. But then we have the game being described again about 50 years later as a primitive game, and here is our kind of British official Gerald Dampier, who's writing in an Indian journal, and he says that it is not. He's kind of like it is obscured by the wide divergence between the religious ideas in the East and West. Pleasure leads straight to Brahma's paradise. This is hedonism, and indeed very contrary to our ordinary Western teaching. In which pleasure is usually supposed to conduct to a very different place, or take the serpents, etc. It is not so clear why love of violence should lead to darkness and so on. Anyway, this is why I'm not sure why he finds this problematic, but he does. And you can see that this is, again, this religious connection is made very clearly by Dampier. But around the same time, and Dampier also acknowledges that around the same time, there is also a Snakes and Ladders game available in the UK, available in England at this time. Here you have a Victorian Snakes and Ladders game, which has probably ended up in England from kind of India via the usual colonial channels, like, well, let's say Johnson or Robertson or Dampier or other people. And here, of course, it becomes a race game. Again, this is the Snakes and Ladders that you're not used to seeing, because it also has words in it. It has qualities, moral qualities like bravery, obedience, and quarrelsomeness, opulence, dishonesty, etc. But the end of it ultimately is that you should kind of, it's going to take you to a position where you're going to become like Wilberforce, Livingston, James Watt, George Stephenson, Isaac Newton, George Washington, Florence Nightingale, Alfred the Great. Okay, that's quite interesting. And then Martin Luther, obviously. And I'll just come to why Luther, obviously, in a second. But it seems to me like based on a Protestant work ethic, where the aim is to become great persons, ranging from Luther to Florence Nightingale, and hard work is going to take you to that kind of position. And then you have very similar games coming out around 1895, one called Kismet, which is available, which you can see in the Victoria and Albert Museum, should you go there. You have a similar kind of descriptions here. Unpunctuality leads you straight to the workhouse, right? And cruelty will lead you to being bitten by the dog here, or obedience is going to raise you straight to somewhere, okay, to the fourth virtue. How nice. And then kind of you have a checkered game of life, which is made by Milton and Milton Bradley at this time. And it is interesting, bear with me a second. Yeah, so it's interesting because Milton Bradley at this time is almost kind of, losing a lot of business, because he started publishing and printing posters of Abraham Lincoln when Abraham Lincoln didn't have the beard. Now, for some reason, Abraham Lincoln kind of decided to wear a beard, and Bradley started losing a lot of money. And then somehow he found this game, this very kind of pedagogical game, and he said that I'm going to make every children's kind of play a Sunday sermon. So he creates this game, checkered game of life. So there we go. Anyway, I think I'm running out of time, so I'll just kind of skip a few and go to the next part. And this is again, of course, something that from Snakes and Ladders also. We could talk about Ludo, we could talk about other things as well, but I'll skip those. But again, playing cards. So playing cards are very interesting as far as in India examples are concerned, because these are actually playing cards painted by Raja Ravi Varma, the famous artist who painted many celebrated kings, queens, and other celebrities, really. So, and also whose paintings are now the model for Amar Chitra Katha. So, Raja Ravi Verma's very stylized, kind of European influenced kind of playing cards showing Indian begums and badshahs and others. And that's kind of there again, kind of that influence coming in, the European influence coming into Indian kind of ideas of playing cards. But also the names of playing cards itself. I mean, you see that most of the playing cards here, they're called, like the suits are, in Hindi, they're called Pan, Eat, Hukum, Chidi. In Marathi, Badam, Chaukat. We speak Kilvar. And I want you to note the word Kilvar. And Telugu, I can't read Telugu, but I'm just reading the English translations. Atinu, Daimanu, Ispetu, Kalavaru. Again, Kalavaru. So now come to Bengal, and the words are very unique. They're Horoton, Ruiton, Chiriton, Ishkapon. Now these words, I mean, well, Isha happens to be the moderator today, and I'm kind of intrigued. So it's has a Dutch connection. And Isha is in Utrecht today. It's like Horoton is heart and Ruiton is Ruiten. Ishkapen is Shoppen. These are the Dutch names for the playing cards. And note the word clever. Clever is Kilvar in Marathi and in Telugu. So somehow the Dutch names of the of cards, the suits, have come into Indian languages. So that's quite interesting. A long journey this is made. Of course, Indian cards are, I mean, the original cards are quite different. There were the Dashavatar cards described depicting 10 avatars of Vishnu. And these two are actually the Ganjifa cards. They're actually borrowing, they're actually brought from Iran, and then kind of they're transculturated in the Indian traditions. But there are also Firangi Ganjifa as well, which show Portuguese soldiers on them. But I don't have a photo of that, unfortunately. But yeah, just to show you that the Ganjifa cards also make their way to Europe. And on the left is this beautiful ivory card, which you find in Robert Clive's collection in Poo's Castle. And on the right, there is a set of cards which were in the Museum of Stockholm. I think the earliest Ganjifa cards were found in Copenhagen. Earliest Ganjifa cards in Europe reached Copenhagen, but these are Stockholm. So you can see that these exchanges are going on this time. Of course, today Ganjifa cards in Europe they're quite well exported, really, but exported for not as playing cards, but as you can see, Ganjifa coasters or various other things or handicrafts. So yeah, they do look like coasters, sadly, but that is a very bizarre transculturation when the ludic character really kind of changes entirely, and the entire tradition changes. But then so okay. And then kind of there are also other kind of games of cards that we play today, like 29, which is a version of the chess game brought by Dutch merchants, and there are multiple versions of 29. In fact, I learned a few of them in the center stock the other day. And there's the really famous Teen Patti, which made a lot of money in the, made a lot of headlines rather, and money during the lockdown. And it's actually a version of the English three-card brag and so on. And of course, most of the games that you're aware of, I don't know if you've seen your parents play solitaire and call it patience, or there's a game called Canasta or Bridge, or sometimes they play something called Bray and Passing Bray, but it's actually what we call hearts in other places. So all of these are very colonial imports. And but these imports also they also get their very Indian kind of like versions. They get their very Indian adaptations. For example, 29 itself was actually in the Dutch game, it's about 28 points. But in India, in many places, it's about 29, which is why it's called 29. So the name itself has changed. The rules have changed. So this is an interesting kind of, you know, experience that that we can look at when we look at the game board as a contact zone. And I would like to look at games, study games, board games particularly, from a non-Western kind of angle, or not kind of, or looking away or outside beyond Western Christian rationality. And here I kind of take a kind of sort of recourse to Walter Mignolo's notions of the decolonial, and kind of looking at it kind of from a different epistemological context and structure of power, really, to kind of look at how these games transculturate and how these kind of exchanges work. And of course, with the decolonial also goes in the idea of creolization, which is about historical processes that generate new, adaptive, and often unexpected cultural forms through the push and pull of collaboration, compromise, and resistance. So again, kind of Ananya Janara Kabir describes the contact zone as being the space where this cohabitation and its unpredictable consequences take place. So she looks at Pondicherry as such a place. And I also kind of want to end with this image of a game called Petanque or Bulle in Pondicherry. I was really surprised to see people playing this game. It's played with iron balls, which are imported from France, still from a particular part of France. And it's this very unique bowling game. And there are these petanque organized sort of petanque societies in Pondicherry. And I don't think anywhere in India, anywhere else in India, we can see this game being played with so much gusto. Of course, not a board game, but still kind of, yeah. So I think, of course, we can find creolization in many of the other games which are not board games. But I would like to focus particularly on board games and look at board games as the site, as the contact zone, really, and sites of transculturation. Thank you. I think I can stop the share.
Thank you, Professor Mukherjee, for that wonderful talk. The floor is open to questions. If anybody would like to ask a question, please unmute yourself. Yes.
Oh, Dibbo.
Souvik, the fascinating talk. I'm so glad that I joined in. If I'm audible, I'm going to start first with what caught my attention at the outset. And I'm glad that that got sort of parsed out once you headed into the meat of the argument. So I read Mary Louise Pratt for the first time as a graduate student when I was teaching composition and rhetoric in the US classroom.
Yes. Yeah.
And of course, as you know, her work is most associated with literacy, right?
Yes.
The ideas around literacy. And she starts, if I'm not mistaken, with her son and baseball cards, if I remember that.
And also a letter that she gets from David Livingstone.
Right.
Somebody who's a descendant of David Livingstone who gives her this letter. Right. Yeah.
So firstly, I was curious about the metaphor or the parallel, the reason that you took up contact zone, because, you know, there's one more similar metaphor which I found equally useful, and I tell you why. And I thought that maybe you've thought about this. So when Anzaldúa talks of the borderlands, right? So the Nepantla kind of conversation of the nos and the ethros, the self and the other.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to lower my hand before I continue. I found that the idea of transculturation and the pedagogic potential of board games seems to have been undercut largely in our post-colonial spaces, I'm not going to say societies, because there's a certain signified of board games as leisure that is often detrimental. So that form of leisure that is detrimental, even in the last picture that you showed, where people sit on the roadside, and I'm aware of some familial conversations where in Bangla we say tash petano.
Yes.
Right? So if you take the literal lingo of it, like tash petano seems to have an element of derogatory, pejorative nature to it. So I wanted you to maybe talk a little more about why. So maybe that's the reason that Anzal Dua's Borderlands or Nepantla came to my mind, because she says a new consciousness arises there, the mestizo consciousness.
Yes.
So I'm a little curious. Firstly, I loved the sort of expansive nature, which is always a hallmark of your talks. So if you could talk a little more about why you chose contact zone, because I do have a few reservations about Anona Jahanada Kabir's using of the word.
Yes.
I agree with I feel it is a little simplistic, while I understand where she comes from. So I understand where you come from, especially because the pedagogic potential. So if you could speak about what led you to this journey to choose the contact zone metaphor, as well as how do you see the pedagogic potential being undercut largely to the cultural signifieds of it? And question 2 is where is have you already published on this, and is there a version of this I can read somewhere?
So okay, let me answer the question 2 quicker. So this is actually about to be kind of submitted in the manuscript, I mean, very soon. And it's a book contract with the same kind of title, Indian Board Games, Colonial Avatars. And I have published on this in a couple of places. One is in the British Library's blog, which is open access, and also it is usually colonized by scroll.in. So it's very easy to find. But there is also a book chapter, which is not open access, obviously, but I'll send it to you if you want, which is on which is a more expansive kind of like analysis of a critique of kind of analysis of kind of Snakes and Ladders as a race game, or Gyan Chopper as a race game, which some Western scholars are wanted to do. But so coming to the first question, I'm glad that you used the word expansive, because also beyond the examples, I've also kind of taken a broad church of theoretical frameworks, some of which don't sit very happily with each other. For example, Mignolo and Ortiz. Mignolo is critical of Ortiz in some respects, in some places. And creolization, well, again, I mean, I too have kind of, I too have to go into it much deeper, really, than how it, but what I do find useful here is perhaps, and transculturation, of course, is fairly old in post-colonial terms, and so is the contact zone in the 90s, I think. But Pratt was publishing on it, or papers on it earlier even. And I can see where you're coming from when you, and also with this idea of mesticization and kind of cannibalism as well, and all of these kind of cultural cannibalism, all of these kind of fantastic ideas, really. And with Miliolo, the decolonial, which is also kind of, well, questioning, challenging the subaltern, thinking that comes from this part of the world. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm actually trying to, I mean, because this is a general talk, really, so I wanted to keep an easier kind of framework, just to throw it out there to see that, look, this is what is happening with board games too. And it's board games are not just vanilla things like you take for leisure, or even in the derogatory sense of, I hate that word, time pass, or time wasting rather. Why are you playing these games? Are time pass, or but I'm sure when one plays chess, it's not just time wasting or just kind of spending time, or kind, that kind of thing. So the pedagogy element and how it moves to becoming a race game in the Victorian work ethic, and why time, how time is perceived in, let's say, the Jain kind of perception of kind of karma, and how it is perceived in the Victorian kind of notion, which we are actually still following. I mean, post-colonial or otherwise, really. I mean, especially when it comes to games, because I mean, uh, I'm sure many post-colonial scholars would kind of still consider games as, like you just said, tash petano, or because it's still kind of considered as pejorative or as kind of somewhat lesser kind of, or culturally lesser kind of element. And that is what I wanted to kind of highlight, that these same, or the similar kind of issues are at stake here as well. And it's not just me. I mean, people like Shutrajit Rai are able to spot these immediately, right? So it's kind of that's where it's kind of. But I think, and here is where I will kind of really take your suggestion, because where I just start with, I think you probably noticed that I was slightly hesitating into Mignolo, but I think a a more robust kind of engagement with Latin American kind of theories on kind of contact, colonial contact, would be
Shovita,
here
I
very.
completely agreed with your use of Minelo, especially because Minolo's understanding of decolonization is a very material process. And the materiality of the gaming practices or the ludic practices are beautifully brought out. And what I was thinking, I'm sorry I interrupted you there, but I thought if you could also comment on this. So kind of post-colonial, canonical post-colonial scholars and their reading of games seems to be quite, if you go up a very old Stuart Hall's kind of reading,
Yeah,
it's a very dominant hegemonic reading of it.
totally.
And
That's what I'm trying to say.
so do you see yourself, and I know you've been doing this for such a long time and with so many young scholars now, are we at a point, maybe in commenting in terms of game studies, are we doing negotiated readings, or are we doing sort of chaotic oppositional readings?
Well, I mean, what do you think? See, the thing is that there is kind of course, when we are talking about readings, the first I would ask you to kind of bring our focus on what are we reading, because these are things that post-colonial scholars traditionally have not been reading at all. So this has been kind of this lacuna, this blank space, really, in that sense that they're not read these at all. So now that we are beginning to read board games in terms of post-colonial kind of theory or what have you, and not just, I'm looking at very traditional board games, but if you look at kind of the recent board games like Catan, Settlers of Catan, and Puerto Rico, or uh, so many others, like totally offensive to my Heart of Africa and these kinds of games. I mean, they're actually the games on which these video games have also kind of been modeled in some ways. But anyway, so they're fundamentally problematic kind of logic of empire which prevails in there. But these have not been studied at all, whether kind of in the global north or in the global south. And so then I would kind of bring the question back to what are we reading here, because there has been no reading as such. If it is a chaotic oppositional reading, then it's a reading. It's in that sense that we are reading a different thing. We're reading different material here, right? I mean, while there have been kind of many studies on food, for example, I mean, for some reason, which was earlier not the case, but for some reason, games kind of don't don't find a place anywhere in kind of discussions in post-colonialism. I mean, so that's perhaps maybe the objective of this book or this project is to is to kind of bring that discussion into in somewhere, begin that discussion, and then of course we can come to see whether it is a chaotic oppositional reading or So that was a diplomatic answer, Deepak. I'll give you a different answer elsewhere.
Yeah, I would love to have the offline conversation with you on this on some time. But thank you, Souvik again. And as always, I always enjoy the granularity that you bring to your readings and your scholarship. So thanks so much. Always inspirational. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Deepak, for coming. So are we? Are we? I think I guess we're okay for questions. So yeah. In which case, I'll thank you, Isha, and all the kind of everybody who is here. And yes, please kind of follow our kind of talks and posts on the Facebook group, the YouTube, and WhatsApp. Yeah, join our mailing list. So hope to see you soon, maybe end of August or September. Let's see.
Thank you. I think we can all agree that it was a very intriguing session where we had, and the QA session was a very interesting conversation, and I think we took a lot from it. There's a lot to think about, and I think Dr. Mukherjee mentioned, I've shared some links to our social media handles. Please follow us, and yes, we'll be back with our talks very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.